The world of work will look very different in the future. Today, many workers still rely on organizations who provide training, coaching, and reward structures to motivate employees. However, this is changing, and the onus is being placed on the service worker to be inherently motivated, accessing their own networks and information sharing platforms. With the increasing transience of service work, more workers will freelance, balancing their next side hustle while keeping an eye on the current job. Moving further away from long-term permanent arrangements, many service workers already start to engage simultaneously with multiple employers across separate yet interwoven service ecosystems. Today, we welcome Gertrude Nontera to discuss personal branding. She is an established author and a science writer who's also passionate about entrepreneurship. After earning a PhD in microbiology and immunology, she started out as a freelance writer as a way to chronicle her journey to financial freedom through online business. She fell in love with making money as a content creator and has never looked back since.
Welcome to our podcast, Coast to Coast. We are here on a mission to empower you with cutting-edge knowledge of business, marketing, and digital communications. We want to inspire you with tips to cultivate your skills and strategies to scale up your business. With proven methods that work, you have just landed on your transformative journey with Jacob Dermalconian.
Hello, Gertrude. Adapting to change is what keeps us relevant, valuable, and at the forefront of the competitive edge. It's a leadership choice to remain current, but doing so doesn't change who we are at our core. Why do you believe it's very important to adapt to change? How can people struggling at these trying times climb over that financial situation and their overwhelming emotions?
Thank you so much for the question. That's such a loaded question. So first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. I really do believe that it's important to adapt to change because change is inevitable. It's inevitable that things are going to change. It's sort of like when the iPhone was invented, it hasn't remained the same. When it came out over a decade ago, the iPhone hasn't remained the same. It's gone through iterations, it's gone through different changes. And almost every year we can expect that Apple is going to come out with a new version of a phone or software or some privacy updates, right? And so change is inevitable because as humans, we tend to innovate and we get bored when one thing is the same for too long, right? So, and also, I'm a scientist, right? So the medications, some of the technologies that have been invented from the time we had things like the bubonic plague and stuff like that, change is inevitable. So as a person, it's important for you to first of all realize that change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. And, sometimes some of those changes are more subtle than others. Definitely over the last year with a pandemic, the change was drastic, right? And nobody likes drastic change. But the reality is that change is always happening. As a person, how do you adapt to these changes, or how do you essentially change your mindset? I think that first of all, it starts with the mindset that things will change, right? And then the second thing is I believe that when you do see things change, you as a human, right, you have to be able, and I don't know why I keep on saying as a human, but as a person, you have to just keep on thinking that, okay, this thing has changed. How can I pivot? How can I adapt to the times so that I can, number one, continue to remain relevant, and number two, continue to make income, right? There was this statistic that I read that, I may be misquoting it, but essentially what the statistic was saying was that over a person's lifetime, they have to learn so many skills in order to continue to remain relevant in their jobs, right? And it's the same thing. So right now, a lot of people will learn that maybe work isn't going into an office, but work could be redefined to being, remote, and being in a remote location and working from there. Or it means learning how to use software like Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So a lot of things, changes are annoying and they're uncomfortable, but adapting to change starts with the mindset that change is going to happen anyway. And if you want to remain relevant in the marketplace, it's important that you adapt.
Very impressive. Actually, in the light of what you have just mentioned and the drastic changes in the business landscape which is impacting all of us, How can someone find their uniqueness to build their reputation and allow themselves to be known as a brand? Many undoubtedly know what's a business brand, but what is exactly personal branding?
Right. So a personal brand simply is, what do people know about you when you're not in the room? Right. That's all it is. It's not anything so wild and far-fetched. And actually, people have been building personal brands for a really long time. It's just that in this generation, we've kind of given it that name. So building a personal brand simply is becoming known for talking about or being involved in a particular industry or area. And I think it's relevant for today. It's so relevant for today because, I have, again, going back on my scientific background, and usually the idea was that, okay, so you go to school, you get your PhD, you get all the degrees, and a job is guaranteed. A job is guaranteed if you get all these degrees, right? And then for those of us that were graduating in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, we began to realize that, well, that narrative is not necessarily true all the time, that there is a place for you to actually stand out and be unique. And one of those ways, there are several ways to do this, but one of these ways is actually to use your voice, and using your voice on, for instance, something like social media, to talk about issues that matter and your subject area. And so building a personal brand is not anything anybody should be scared of. It should be something that people embrace, because the days of just stacking up degrees and getting a job because of your degrees, those no longer exist. You absolutely, even if you don't build it online, even if you don't build a personal brand online, within your community, within your industry, right? You can be involved in conferences. You can be involved in the publications that go on in your industry. Your presence should be felt within your industry. When you do that, you begin to become an asset, and an asset that a lot of people want to engage with. So building a personal brand I think is fantastic. I think it's relevant for today, and it's especially crucial to build one if you want to win in the world of work as it is currently.
We certainly now can see personal branding in the context of brand leadership beyond influencer marketing, which many of us are acquainted with. In context of what you've just mentioned, I would like to ask you in particular about the power of storytelling. When a story catches our attention and engages us, we are more likely to absorb the content and the meaning within it than if the same message was presented simply in facts and figures. How can we define our message and the power of storytelling in building our personal brand?
Right, such a great question. So, just think about the teacher that your most favorite teacher from school, like whichever level of school. It could have been primary school, elementary school, middle school, high school, college. I bet the person that you remember the most is the person who tended to tell stories and tended to make the content funny. Not just being goofy, but they made it funny and they made it educational and they told stories. I still remember one of my biology professors who always told stories about what he was teaching. It was biology, it was science, it was hard facts, but he turned it into a story. And that's how come I still remember some of the things that he taught in his class 15 years later. So the brain is a really, really powerful thing when it comes to storytelling, in that we tend to remember stories much better than we remember facts or figures. We remember stories. So every time I used to teach students, and every time I would teach them, I would try to give an anecdote, I would try to give a story, I would try to put it in a story format so that it would be easier for them to pull those facts right from their minds. And so storytelling is powerful because our brains remember them. The other thing is that anything can be turned into a story. So I don't think there's any field, okay, there's no field, be it biology, history, economics, there's nothing that cannot be turned into a story. And what's a story? If you watch every movie, if you watch every single movie out there, usually this is what happens. At the beginning of the movie, we have a hero or a heroine, and this person is faced with a dilemma. they're faced with a dilemma, and then they have to solve the dilemma. So the whole movie is about them solving the dilemma, whether that's falling in love with somebody or their business crashing or whatever. They have to, by the end of the movie, we come to a resolution. So with your storytelling, it's the same thing. Okay, so there is a problem. There is something going on in your industry that needs a solution, right? Okay, so how did we solve this? Let's talk about that journey of solving it. Let's talk about the experiences, right? I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I think that's how we even connected. But one of the things that I do is I will share a personal story. It doesn't have to be your whole life story, but it could be a snippet that, I used to, like today I shared something about failure, and I was saying failure it doesn't mean the end of your life or career, right? Failure is a learning, even though it may be embarrassing, even though it may be heart-wrenching, it's just a learning experience. So take it as such, right? And I talked about how it was just one sentence. I said, I myself used to have this mentality. So somebody's going to remember that, she used to have that, right? But here's the solution. So storytelling really is identifying a problem and taking somebody on a journey to the solution and coming to a resolution of the problem. So I do believe that storytelling, whether you choose to build your brand online or you choose to build it offline, right? You can always use storytelling to really make your message memorable rather than throwing just facts and figures. Those are good, those are important, but wrap it up in a story to make people remember.
Allow me to elaborate on what you just mentioned with regards to the importance of authenticity of the story. Actually, young generations are influenced by incompetent self-proclaimed life coaches, popular wannabe content creators, and hawks personas on all social platforms, which is impacting eventually our societies at large. As a scholar yourself, how do you think we can actually create the story which is authentic and delivers the message while cutting through the clutter and noise?
Right. Okay. So yes. So that's really a good question. So first of all, if it's not true, I don't share it. Right. It's like if it's not true or if I have not been given permission to share that, I don't share it. For instance, you will hardly find me sharing stories about my family. That's because my family hasn't given me permission to share certain stories. And I haven't asked for the permission. So I don't share stories necessarily about my family. I may share like one or two things about my husband and son sometimes, but it's very rare for me to do that. Instead, I focus on personal stories, or I focus on stories that I've read in books. Right, and a lesson that I gleaned from that story. So it's important. And here's the thing is, if you are inauthentic, eventually it's going to catch up with you. Eventually it's going to catch up with you. No matter how hard you try to pretend, it's going to catch up with you. So it's really important to be careful when you're building, especially if you're building a brand online and anywhere, to be real, to be true. You don't have to, if you're not an extrovert, you don't have to fake like you're an extrovert, right? If you're truly a quiet person, you don't have to talk to everybody. You know what I'm saying? So you don't have to change who you are necessarily to be interesting. And here's the reason, because people have different tastes. Some people are going to be drawn to your message and some people are going to be repelled by your message. That's okay. Some people buy my books, some people do not buy my books. And that could be for various reasons. It could be that I have short hair. It could be that I have gray hair, so they think I'm too old and they can't listen to an old woman. It could be anything, right? But I'm not going to necessarily fake to be somebody else just so that people will like me or people will follow me. So I think first of all, it's important to just learn who are you. I think that's the other thing is like people don't even learn who they are. People don't even take time to learn who they are. Who are you? Right. And once you know who you are and are, happy about who you are, hopefully you are happy about who you are and what you've accomplished, then you can share bits and pieces of that. You don't have to share your whole life story. Nobody wants to read about that. You don't have to share every single thing that goes on in your life if you don't want to. But definitely you can pick up a sentence or an anecdote or something very brief. Even it could be like, today I walked outside my door and I saw somebody walking his dog. And the way he talked to his dog, I wish more people would talk to people that way. Like it could be something so simple. You don't have to reveal your bank account information. You don't have to show us if you have a Lamborghini or not, unless you want to show us. You don't have to show us anything that you don't want to show us, and you don't have to be fake about it. So I think that's how I approach building a personal brand. Is I'm not even sharing stories about people who are close to me because they're close to me and they may not want me to share that. And I haven't asked them permission to share that, so I won't share it. But there is enough in my life. I've read enough books. And that's another thing. When you watch movies, read books, listen to when you're filling up your own creative well, you always have material to share, and you don't have to resort to all kinds of like weird things just to get a following online.
You have tapped onto the topic of sharing stories on social media and digital platforms. Of course, there's a lot of media tools out there, but sometimes you can find it very difficult to build meaningful relationships on these platforms. In your opinion, how can someone build a strong relationship engine?
So again, it goes back to just being really intentional about what your purpose is. I think if you want to build a personal brand online, you have to be intentional about what your purpose is and who you want to reach. So first of all, defining that is important. Building relationships really starts with listening. So when you begin to be authentic online and share real stories and share helpful content and build that personal brand, it's inevitable that people are going to reach out and ask questions or follow-up questions to the content that you've produced. So I did this video where I was talking about being a pregnant PhD student, and I received a lot of good feedback on that video of people saying, oh, I want to start a family as well. And I didn't think I would be able to start a family because I'm in a PhD program, but your video has given me some encouragement to go ahead and do that, right? And I remember there was a specific question I received in my inbox, somebody saying, thank you for the video. I was wondering, could you answer this question? And I ended up, and one of the things I like to do is when I get asked a question in my direct messages, I like to take the question without and anonymize it and answer it through a video or through, a piece of content. And I did that, and the person was so appreciative. And there have been a few times where I've taken those kind of questions and answered them through video, and the people have been so appreciative. One of the first things is to be a good listener, to not ignore people's questions when they pose it to you, and to actually turn those questions into content that helps those individuals. So for me, that's how I've built relationships with people. I've met people online through my content that I'm still, good friends or, know very well. So it's a matter of listening and paying attention to what people in the community that is beginning to form around your message are asking and are saying.
You have tapped on the topic of sharing stories on social media and digital platforms. Of course, there's a lot of media tools out there, but sometimes we can find it very difficult to build meaningful relationships on these platforms. From your personal experience, how can someone capitalize on their personal branding in creating a sustainable business model which leads to entrepreneurship and to monetize it to become financially independent?
Right. Okay. So that's also another really good question. So I think that there are several business models out there. Two that I find to be that I have found beneficial and which have been immediately profitable to me have been offering a service as a freelancer and also offering a service as a coach. So as a freelancer, it's essential. Basically, you're packaging whatever it is that you're doing. So let's say you're really good at building websites, or you're really good at writing content. You're really good at taking photographs, right? So you essentially offer that, you package that up and offer that as a service to a company, to an individual, to somebody that will have use of that skill. So when I worked as a freelance writer for a really long time before my current role, and as a freelance writer, I worked with physician practices, I worked with health technology companies to develop their content, to develop their blog content, email content, content for social media. And that was a service because they didn't have the time or bandwidth to do it. They needed somebody to do it, so they outsourced that to me, and I got paid as a result. And so just really thinking about your skill set and how you can package that in a valuable way for somebody, that's one way to get started with freelancing. To be a successful freelancer, you really have to define what success is for yourself. So maybe I will need $5,000 a month to survive where I live, and maybe you only need $1,000 and you're going to be comfortable where you live. So it's important for you to define what success means to you. Also, it's important to define work-life balance, because you don't want to work yourself yourself into, into being sick or, being unhealthy. But define what success means to you. And once you define that, you go ahead and pursue that. And so perhaps if you become a freelance writer like I was, you may decide that, okay, $1,000 is all I need to be able to pay my bills and, and have a comfortable lifestyle where I live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 5 blog posts for somebody that wants my services for $200 each. So if I write 5 blog posts per month for $200 each, I make my $1,000 and I'm good. So by defining it that way, you begin to actually, you'll be able to break it down in a way that you'll be able to get there. As a coach, this is where you have some kind of expertise or knowledge that you can coach other people on. So I'm a book coach. So for people that want to write books, I work with them through the writing process, through the self-publishing process, because you have this knowledge and not everybody has the knowledge. Not everybody wants to spend all the time it takes to go learn the knowledge, right? So you become somebody that provides them with that knowledge and guidance and accountability that allows them to reach that specific goal. And again, you just have to think of it as how many clients do I need? How many coaching clients do I need? Or how much work do I need to do to reach my goal? So if you have a coaching package that is $1,000 and all you need is $1,000, then all you need is 1 client a month. If you have a coach, if you need $5,000, then you need 5 clients a month, right? So it's important to really define what success is to you and then break it down in a way that makes sense.
Well, that's amazing insight into the business context. As a matter of fact, I cannot but think about the competition in the market. There's a lot of people who are trying to do exactly the same thing. All of us are certainly unique in our existence, in our own experience and knowledge. But how do you think someone can actually succeed in selling and delivering their product, their own service, or their content and lead the competition?
Here's my slightly unpopular opinion. I know in the business world, in the corporate business world, people tend to think of competition quite a bit. And I understand why that's necessary. But personally, the way that I think of competition is I don't think of the competition. because here's why. If you begin to build, especially for personal brands. Now, for corporate brands, that could be slightly different. But for a personal brand, building a personal brand, a business built around a personal brand, I would say to focus on making your personal brand unique and relevant and helpful, right? And also focus on building those meaningful relationships with the people that have engaged with you. If you do this consistently and people really do feel like you care about them and care about what they have to say, and they identify with what you have to say, you won't have to be concerned about competition. This, again, I wanted to define that because for personal brands specifically, because, let's say Coca-Cola and Pepsi, right? Those are 2 companies that we know compete against each other. They definitely will have to learn what each other is doing in order to continue to be relevant in this world that we're in. But as a personal brand, which is, I think there's some parallels to corporate branding as well. But with a personal brand, I really do think that focusing on building those meaningful relationships. There's a book by Pat Flynn called Superfans. And in Superfans, Pat Flynn essentially lays out how you can build relationships with the people that are in your community to the point where they become super fans. And these super fans, and I've experienced this, these super fans will buy almost everything you put out. They will buy your books. Even if they bought something of yours before, if you come out with a new edition, they will buy that. They will stick with you because you have demonstrated that you hear them and you care about what they have to say and what they, and what their needs are. And if you really demonstrate it as a personal brand and you intend to build a business around that personal brand, that's how I have found that it works really well. There's always going to be competition. There's no, so coming back to your question, I wanted to take that caveat first, but coming back to your question, there's always going to be competition. There's always going to be somebody who is writing similar books to you, somebody that is, doing something very similar to you. There are thousands of people doing that, right? But I find that all of us cannot be the same. When I started talking to academics and I started producing content around talking to academics, I know one of the things I heard was, oh, this person already does this person already does that. But one of the arguments I always had was, yeah, but that person is not me. That person doesn't have my experience. That person doesn't have these other things that other people, other demographics are going to identify with. So I'm going to leverage those things about myself, about my experience, and use that to connect with the people that are going to be my most ideal clients. Like we mentioned earlier, some people are not going to like you. Maybe just because of your hair or your nails or whatever. I don't worry so much about the competition. I really think about how best can I serve people today.
Certainly, the focus must be always on building rapport and then doing it consistently by delivering on your promise. Obviously, you're in the business of selling books mainly. Any advice you can give to those young aspiring people who perceive entrepreneurship as a trip to the beach in Thailand or Bali?
Right. Thank you for that question. I think you should learn as much as you can and then also learn how to filter information, right? So yes, you may see somebody relaxing in Bali or Thailand, but what you don't know their whole story, right? People don't always share, like I was saying earlier, people don't share every single thing about themselves. Maybe that person had parents that had given them a trust fund, right? Maybe that person knows somebody that lives there and so is chilling there because they have a friend who has been living in Bali for 10 years and so they can go to their place when they go to Bali. So they may go and be relaxing on the beach. You're like, oh wow, they have such a great life, but no, they got invited by a friend to Bali, right? So it's really important for you to take all of this, all of the information that's coming at you, to take all of it in with some perspective, and also to realize that if somebody has done something, then it's possible for you to do it as well if that's your interest. So if you want to write books, the reason I started writing books is because I saw somebody else writing books. I'm like, I love writing books and they're selling books. What? I'm going to do that too. And I sat down, I disciplined myself. I learned all there was for me to learn about writing and launching a book and self-publishing it. And I did it. And I was very successful with, I've been quite successful with, at least as successful as I define success, with selling my books and making sure people are aware of my books. So it's important for you to learn as much as you can, to take things within perspective, and also to realize that it's not impossible. You may have challenges, and I know that maybe people listen to this may be listening from different parts of the world, and all the parts of the world are not the same. Some places are more affluent than others, but I think no matter the circumstance, you can make the best of the situation and use what you have. There are people that have built entire empires using a cell phone, and if all you have is a cell phone, then use it.
These new changes will bring a host of new challenges, including an increased reliance on individual workers to plan their future through self-funded retirement and healthcare. I'm sure that our audience can realize the importance of personal branding as the gig economy will continue to grow. Thank you, Gertrude.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you too. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this episode from Coast to Coast Podcast. For more resources and access to episodes which will help you find real marketing success, visit www.jacobinternationalgroup.com. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and stay connected on all our social media accounts.